Hi, thanks for joining me as we look at the current state of pornography and what I believe would be a better name for pornography these days. One recommendation I would have for you as we go through this is to pay attention to anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. Those are typically the areas that we need to work on. Part of my hope in this being primarily for counselors, but I think it's applicable um, to lots of other people's friends, pastors, community leaders, others that are interested in helping those struggling with pornography use and pornography addiction. I think it's essential that we deal with our own stuff so that we can help others. And so my goal here is to equip you not only to be helpful, but to be able to be empathetic with whoever you know who's dealing with this. One warning is I'm going to be dealing with things that are really difficult to hear. Feel free at any point to pause this, to walk away, to take care of yourself as we get into these things. If you would like more information, you can find that on my website, as seen here. For more resources, go there. I've got other things that go along with this presentation, as well as what I think to be some other helpful resources you can give to others. A little bit about myself. I'm an LPC, licensed professional counselor, and licensed marriage family therapist. I have 2 master's degrees from Reformed Seminary, one in biblical studies, one in counseling. I'm also a certified sex addiction therapist. I'm trained in EMDR, which is a way to treat trauma and shame. I'm also trained in the Gottman method when working with couples. I'm currently an adjunct professor at Reformed Seminary in the counseling program, as well as a doctoral student in the counselor education and supervision program. I own and am a therapist at Red River Counseling, and I have years of experience in groups, in individual counseling, personally and professionally. I'm married. This is my family. I've been married for around 18 years. We got 4 kids and 3 dogs, so we got a house full going on. This is me when I was about 8, maybe 9 years old. This is when I was first introduced to pornography. Just playing with friends, and they found a stash of Playboys sitting out in the woods. They showed it to me. And I can say from this day forward, I was different. Right? It changed me. It changed the way I viewed myself, changed the way I viewed others. It over-sexualized things that didn't need to be sexualized. It took me a long time to work out of that. I was introduced to it by finding some Playboys in the woods, right? So whose fault was that? Like, I felt this deep guilt and shame. This is a thing that doesn't, it's not congruent with kind of my physiological development, my sexual development. Didn't make sense to me. And so who do you blame for that? You blame yourself. And you'll see today, I think that's a big part of pornography use for a lot of people, is the deep shame that can come with it. But from this day forward, everything was sexualized. It's not how it ought to be, right? My hope today is to be able to help you, to help others that struggle with those same things. We're going to look at 4 things, 4 primary questions. And again, the goal is when somebody walks into your office or your home, whatever role you have in their life, that you would be able to be helpful to them, but also empathetic to their struggles. So we're going to first look at what is pornography. You may think you know. I'm going to probably tell you you don't know the current state of pornography. Then we're going to look at who uses pornography. Again, this one might have some surprises for you. Why do people use pornography? This one is probably of all of them, this is the one that will make the most sense, probably the way you already understand it. And then finally, how can we help? So, what is pornography? If you're over 20 and you have not looked at pornography since you were a teenager, you most likely don't know what pornography is these days. Just to kind of define pornography, the word pornography was coined from the Greek words porne and porneia, which is prostitute or prostitution, as well as graphine, which is to write or record something. It's an illustration, right? To graph it out. And then the suffix ia, which is the state of something, the property of something, places them. So the literal definition of pornography is a written description or illustration of prostitutes or prostitution. I don't believe that word fits any longer what's going on online, especially. I want to look at this to kind of build up to what's going on today by looking at two parallel histories, opioids and pornography. And I think that's kind of a weird thing to do, right? But I think it'll make sense. Part of what I want you to see is as technology refines the substance, right, or just as technology finds the delivery apparatus of something, that thing, right, be it something you ingest, be it something that's a kind of a process that you take part in, that thing becomes, for lack of a better word, more addictive. Right? It's not a great word for it, but that's kind of what's going on. So as technology refines, the addictiveness increase is one way to say it. So here's two things: poppy plant and the Venus of Willendorf. This is going back. Poppy plant was cultivated in Mesopotamia, 3400 BC. This Venus of Willendorf is from way back. And what we're looking at is the image of two good things, right? Neither of these things are inherently bad. Plant and pregnancy. Neither of these is very bad. In Mesopotamia, they started to cultivate a poppy plant using the oils from the plant, and they put it into kind of a tablet form or an oil for a drink. And Sumerians referred to this as whole gill, which means it's the joy plant, right? You're going to name your drug, name it well, right? The joy plant. Sumerians passed it along with its euphoric effects to the Assyrians, Assyrians to the Babylonians, Babylonians to the Egyptians. Opioids work roughly the same way today. They attach receptors in the brain, send signals to block pain, slow breathing, and to produce this euphoric effect. This Venus of Willendorf, again, it's 4.5 inches tall. It's one of the earliest images that we have of someone making an image of mankind. Thousands of years ago, it was basically just a pregnancy, right? It was a way to kind of praise pregnancy. This in of itself is not what I would refer to as being over-sexualized, but it goes all the way back. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD and buried the city of Pompeii, excavators have been able to go back and find in those ruins explicit frescoes and sculptures that were over-sexualizing. And so part I want you to see is how good things, right, like these, can be taken, right, and can be twisted, for lack of a better word, into something else, right? AD 1500, the Portuguese introduced smoking opium, so the technology refines the delivery apparatus. And so as they're trading along the East China Sea, they introduced smoking opium. The effects were instantaneous, right? Early, the Chinese considered this barbaric. During the height of the Reformation around 1500s, opium is reintroduced into European medical literature as laudanum, right? And these little black pills they called the stones of immortality. Again, great name for your drug. They were put into citrus juice and other ways as painkillers. About the same time in the 1550s, the Catholic Church, Pope Paul IV, prepares this index of banned books. Most of those for theological reasons, but some of them, like the Decameron, as you see here, were banned because of explicit sexual references, as well as being theologically challenging. And so, again, what's going on in the 1500s, 1400s? The printing press. So as technology refines it, right, changes it. 1800s, Friedrich Soturner, right, in Germany, discovers the active ingredient of opium, dissolving in an acid, neutralizing with ammonia, creating morphine. Morphine is 10 times more powerful than processed opium. They had believed at that point, physicians had believed that they had finally perfected and tamed opium. They had made it more reliable, more long-lasting, more safe. And so they lauded this as God's own medicine. Stellar name for a drug, right? Morphine, again, 10 times more powerful. 48, John Cleland writes this book, The Memoirs of a Woman in Pleasure. It scandalizes that area, right? In Britain, becomes banned eventually, but it is an explicit memoir of sexually explicit references. 1853, Dr. Alexander Wood discovers a new way of administering. So technology refines the administration of morphine. You inject it, 30 times more powerful than opium. 1865, Edward Monet paints this painting here, Olympia. There was nude paintings up to this point, but this scandalized Paris because of its explicit sexual nature. It was meant to be more graphic, I guess you would say, than what was around. Right? Technology refines it. Right? They're able to paint now. They're able to not just write about, but illustrate sexually explicit images. 1874, heroin is first synthesized by boiling morphine over a stove. You can inject, sniff, snort, smoke it, right? So it makes it more accessible. It is 50 to 150 times more powerful than opium. 1899 is the first softcore erotic film. It was basically a striptease, a woman bathing in front of the camera. 9 years later, 1908, the first hardcore erotic film that we know of is produced. Difference being softcore shows nudity, hardcore shows some sort of sexual act. 1916, oxycodone, 1,500 times more powerful than opium. Right? The difference here is an opiate is a drug such as morphine, codeine, heroin, which is containing or derived from opium, right? The poppy plant that we just talked about. Opioids, on the other hand, are a synthetic or semi-synthetic substance which produces opium-like effects. So in 1916, oxycodone was created. 1939, it's first introduced into America. About the same time period, 1920s, again, technology continues to refine this. These little magazines, Tijuana Bibles, or cartoon illustrations of sexually explicit acts, scenes with popular cartoon characters or icons from the culture. These were mass distributed. 1959, fentanyl. Janssen Pharmaceutica first develops fentanyl. We think of it as maybe a recent drug. It's not developed back then. It was used primarily for an anesthetic and pain reliever for medical purposes. And then in the mid-90s, the fentanyl patch was introduced. Right? It could be, it continues to be developed, even in forms of like a lollipop. Right? In the 40s, the word pinup was coined to describe pictures that were torn out of men's magazines and pinned up on the wall by soldiers. In the 50s, the emphasis was on breasts, but in the 40s, the emphasis was primarily on legs. Right? Betty Grable and Marilyn Monroe were two of the most popular pinup models. Marilyn Monroe continued to be popular for men's magazines into the 50s. In the 50s, we see the first rise of mass market softcore pornographic magazines. Modern Man in 1952, Playboy in 1953. Hefner starts Playboy. It's this new kind of glossy magazine. He coins the term centerfold, and puts in the first issue, puts an image of Marilyn Monroe despite her objections as the centerfold. And that becomes a theme for pornographic despite her protest. They do it anyways. You see that. And so these new magazines featured nude or semi-nude women, sometimes simulating masturbation. But at this point, genitalia and pubic hair were not displayed in these magazines. 1974, carfentanil. It's a synthetic opioid agonist. It's considered to be the most potent of opioids known. Janssen Pharmaceutica, again, develops it. It's similar to fentanyl, but it's 100 times stronger than its chemical cousin. It is 10 times stronger than morphine. It is 30,000 times more powerful than processed opium. It was never intended to be used on humans, and it's in fact so lethal that it's classified as a chemical weapon. Although we've seen it kind of through the black market drugs sneak in to drug use on the street. The only legitimate use is a tranquilizer for large animals like elephants. By the end of the 70s, erotic films accounted for over half of all videotapes. Again, So think about the technology progression. So it goes from a still image to now it's a videotape. One substantial theory of why VHS, that was owned by JVC, beat out Sony's Betamax, because Sony's Betamax refused to produce pornography. JVC would, therefore it takes off. Over half of the videotapes in the 70s were pornographic. In 96, Oxycontin, so it's 1,500 times more powerful than opium, but the difference is it's an extended release. And this is kind of the end of the opioid transformation. Right? Yeah, you could ingest it and it would slowly release over time, or you could, these were easily accessible. There's tons written on kind of how this was pushed in pharmacies, and part of the problem we're facing today with the deaths by oxy, right? It's terrible. These were easily accessible. They were made pretty cheap. You could grind them up, right? And you could get all that effect of the 24-hour, 12-hour release immediately, all at once. In the 90s, dial-up internet is introduced, right? At the same time, magazines like Hustler began to feature more and different types of sexually explicit material, more fetish-focused pornographic material. Internet, right? In the 90s, some people had it. It was about 56 kilobytes per second. If you use dial-up, you'd hear that the grinding, and then it would slowly display the site. And by 2001, there were about 70,000 adult websites. Today, there's well over 4 to 5 million pornographic websites in the US alone. As technology developed, right, it kind of pushed pornography access, but at the same time, pornography really has been part of the thing that's influenced the transformation of the internet. So opioid transformation kind of ceases, right? The internet doesn't. In the 2000s, DSL is introduced. In 95, only about 0.04% of the world's population had access to the internet. Most of that, over half of it, was in the US. It was dial-up, slow speeds, 56 kilobytes per second, like I said. By the first decade of the 21st century, many developed nations used faster broadband technology. By 2014, 41% of the world's population had access primarily through broadband connection, right? And that's not all bad. There's a lot of really good stuff that's come from that. So you see this technology increase, faster speeds, faster download speeds, faster upload speeds, faster transmission. By the 2010s, you see fiber to home, right? So it goes from kilobytes per second to megabytes, to hundreds of megabytes, to today, gigabytes per second. There's a direct correlation between high-speed internet use and pornography production and consumption, as well as a whole host of other issues we're going to get to. Then in the mid-2000s, smartphones are developed, right? Smartphones allow us to interact with pornography in a more secret, more accessible, more insidious type of way. But it also brought in the era of sexting, right? Smartphones allowed you to carry everything we've just discussed up to this point. All the magazines, all the VHS, everything that's been discussed is now in your pocket. And it also allowed you to become not just a consumer of pornography, but a producer, a participant in pornography. Currently, where we're at, it's really virtual and augmented reality, as well as technology-assisted, teledildonics, sex bots, that sort of thing. This is from phys.org, an article they wrote called For the Love of Technology. It says this: in the sex industry, VR, virtual reality, is already being used in ways that go beyond the passive viewing of pornography. Immersive virtual worlds and multiplayer environments, often coupled with haptic feedback devices, which are devices you wear that stimulate you as you're watching a thing. They're already being created that offer people intense sexual experiences that the real world could never offer. Sex bots, right? These haptic devices can now measure your heart rate, measure your hormones. They can respond through haptic feedback with devices that sexually stimulate. Bottom line, VR and haptic feedback devices create an environment that makes your brain even more believing that this is real, not virtual. This is the current state. This is not the outlier. This is currently what's going on. And as pornography, as you've seen this, technology increases, pornography becomes more but also different. We're going to watch a short clip by Philip Zimbardo, who talked about this as he talked about the state of kind of what's going on.
What are the causes? Well, it's an unintended consequence. I think it's excessive internet use in general, excessive video gaming, excessive new access to pornography. The problem is these are arousal addictions. Drug addiction, you simply want more. Arousal addiction, you want different. Drugs, you want more of the same, different. So you need the novelty, you need the arousal, you need to be sustained. And the problem is the industry is supplying it. Jane McGonigal told us last year that by the time a boy is 21, he's played 10,000 hours of video games, most of that in isolation. As you remember, Cindy Gallup said boys don't know the difference between making love, men between making love and doing porn. The average boy now watches 50 porn video clips a week. And there's some guy watching 100, obviously. And the porn industry is the fastest growing industry in America, 15 billion annually. For every 400 movies made in Hollywood, there are 11,000 now made porn videos.
So as you can see what he's talking about, it's more and it's different. Arousal addiction needs more plus different, not just more of the same thing. That's why men particularly who I've primarily worked with, I can speak to, that they don't still use the same Victoria's Secret they found, in their mom's bedroom when they were a kid to masturbate and fantasize. It continues to evolve over time. And where that's taken us is kind of what I want to talk about. De-anthropornography. I've tried to think about what's a better word to encapsulate the current state of pornography. We've seen that the definition of pornography really doesn't fit the technological advances that have come. So let me explain to you kind of why that is and set this up. So mainstream pornography, the research that I've read, the best way to kind of say what it's about is it's really degrading to women. In the rest of these slides, you're going to see that the dark area of the graph represents the affirmative response. In her TED Talk that Zimbardo just mentioned, Gail Dines discussed and shows, filter out images and advertisement of what it would be like for a 12-year-old boy who's just curious, just types in the word porn into his Google search. And what she finds is quite disturbing. First, the boy is likely to click on a site of what's now probably the most popular pornography thing, which is gagging. Gagging is where a man gags a woman with his genitalia until she cries. Typically, they found that these scenes end with him cursing her and ejaculating on her face. Pornography nowadays, it dehumanizes the person in real time, and that's not an outlier. This is kind of the normative. And so this was found by Anna Bridges and her team. And this is back in 2010. A lot of these stats have not been fully updated. But they found then that 48% of scenes of pornography on the internet had some sort of verbal aggression, where the woman was called some sort of derogatory name. They found that 88% of those scenes had some sort of physical aggression, spanking, slapping, gagging. What they concluded was that 90% of scenes contained at least one act of aggression if physical and verbal aggression were combined. The disturbing part to me is that the targets of the aggression were depicted as responding either neutrally or positively to those acts of aggression. So this is primarily what kids who stumble upon porn, this is what they're being taught is healthy sexuality, is some sort of degradation to others. Pornography performers, Tanya Burleson, she was known as Jersey Jackson, a pornography actress, said, guys are punching you in the face. You get ripped, your insides can come out of you. It's never ending. You're viewed as an object, not as a human with a spirit. People do drugs because they can't deal with the way they're being treated. Carlos Scalisi, the owner of Sexuary Video, says it this way: amateurs come across better on screen. Our customers can feel that, especially by women. You can see it. They still feel strong pain. As you see in these graphs, 52% of people from from the same research as earlier said forced or painful sexual acts in porn are always wrong. So 48% didn't believe it was always wrong. 44% believe that someone in porn being depicted in a demeaning way is always wrong. 56% did not believe that. So in order to give more and different types of porn, producers mixed it with America's great obsession, violence. I'm about to talk about some slides about child sexual abuse. And if this may be a point where you may want to pause and walk away, just be aware. This may trigger you. Last year, Michael Keller and Gabrielle Dance wrote an article for the New York Times, September 29th, 2019. It was called "The Internet is Overrun with Images of Child Sexual Abuse. What Went Wrong?" And think about this. In 1998, as we talked about earlier, Hustler had started printing hardcore pornography and more fetishized pornography, right? More and different. The internet then becomes more widely used for pornography. The more and different continues to escalate. In 1998, they found there were over 3,000 reports of child sexual abuse imagery, meaning that someone reported instances of child sexual abuse online to the authorities. Each of the dots that you see there, the little red dots, represents 100 reports. A decade later, 2008, reports of digital distribution of child pornography soared to over 100,000 per year. High speed and broadband internet, right? Mid-2000s, the phone started to become available, the smartphone. In 2014, right, fiber to home, technology increases. That number was surpassed 1 million for the first time. In 2018, there were over 18.4 million, more than 1/3 of the total ever reported. Those reports included over 45 million images and flagged as child sexual abuse. From the authors, they say this: criminals are increasingly going dark to hide their tracks. They're using virtual private networks to mask their locations, deploying encryption techniques to obscure their messages and make their hard drives impenetrable, and posting on the so-called dark web, the vast underbelly of the internet, which is inaccessible to conventional browsers. As technology lowers people's inhibitions, online groups are sharing images of younger and younger children in more extreme forms of abuse. It's more and it's different. People don't start here, right? They start with that still image of, a nude person, softcore porn. But the more indifferent of the arousal addiction creates where in time you're just consuming and you're really not even paying attention to it. My own personal work, people that have found themselves looking at things that were totally against their values. It's as if they just woke up there one day. They don't really know how they got there, but this is the process, more and different. And so what I say is we need to call this by a better name. Pornography, a written illustration graphic of prostitution, that doesn't fit with what we just saw. Some people say it this way: you're not dealing with your granddad's porn at this point. You need a new word. And so D-porn, de-anthropornography. D is a prefix which indicates the removal of something. Anthropos, the Greek meaning human being. And then pornography, kind of in the colloquial term as today, is an illustration of some sort of sexual act. And so de-anthropornography is a written description or illustration of dehumanized pornography. So who's using this? If we were in a room giving this presentation, as I typically do, I would tell you to look to your right and to your left. If you're a guy, statistically, 2 of the 3 of you are using pornography. So if you're not doing it, the other 2 are. If you're a female, you think it'd be way different. But if you're a female in your 20s, and all 3 of you are, it's about the same, right? If you're in your 30s, it's about 1 of the 3 of you. I'm going to go through a lot of research. This is over the last 5, sometimes 10 years. Again, there's not a whole lot of up-to-date research on this as I would like. But what research tells us is that it's getting more and more and more intense. over time. This is back from 2013. The HuffPost said this: porn sites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. How much Netflix have you binged, right? How much have you shopped on Amazon? How much have you ranted on Twitter, right? Porn sites get more interaction than those three combined, and that was back then. Statistically, we know pornography consumption has risen at even higher levels today. So some statistics from Pornhub, kind of the most widely used site, and this is from 2017. They would have 81 million daily average visits, 25 billion searches performed, 50,000 searches per minute, 800 searches per second, 68 years of content uploaded, meaning that in 2017, if you sat down and watched every video for 24 hours a day on Pornhub, it would take you 68 years to catch up. The reality is, it continues to escalate. You would never in your lifetime be able to consume all that's on there. So who uses it? Let's talk about men. Pornography at least once a month. Again, dark is affirmative in these graphs. The following percentage of men say they view pornography at least once a month. 79% of 18 to 30-year-olds, 67% of 31 to 49-year-olds, and 49% of 50 to 68-year-old men once a month. And this was from 2014 and 2016. What about women? 76% of 18 to 30-year-old women say they use it at least once per month. 16% of 31 to 49-year-olds, and 4% of 50 to 68-year-olds. And so what does this tell us? It means that women aren't immune to pornography. And earlier we talked about the degradation of people, particularly of women, in pornography. Right? How does it, and just think about that, how does that influence a developing woman, particularly in their teens, early adults? This is what they see. If no one's told them otherwise, this becomes normalized. And so to be degraded in sex feels normal. This is natural. This is just what it is. All right. What about married and unmarried? Is there a big difference? 55% of married men say they watch porn at least once a month, compared to 70% of unmarried men. So it's relatively pretty close. Marriage doesn't really change a whole lot of this, as we would just assume. What about married women? 25% of married women say they watch porn at least once a month, compared to 16% of unmarried women. This next slide is interesting, and this is 2016, right? So smartphones are developed. Today, though, we know that technology increases every 3 months. So have received at least one nude image electronically. Men have received, 57% of men received at least one nude image, 69% of women. Most of us know somebody that's received a nude image without being asked. And these are conversations I've had to talk to my kids about. Like, people are going to ask you for this. People are going to send this to you. Here's how to respond, right? The cell phone, smartphone, allows you not just to be a consumer, but a participant. Problem is, sometimes it's an unwilling participant. These stats, and again, I want to context this in think about the technological increases over time. 2016, this survey by the Barna Groups asked people at different ages. I started looking at pornography before puberty. People that are 51 to 69-year-olds today, only about 6% of them viewed pornography before puberty. So think about what they had access to. They had access maybe to magazines, maybe, right? 13% of people aged 31 to 50-year-olds, that's my age, it's people that had access primarily to VHS, to magazines, a little bit to dial-up, right? 13% of them saw pornography before puberty. People 25 to 30-year-old, 27% of them responded that they had seen pornography before puberty. And so as technology increases, right, it's making the age of first viewing pornography younger and younger and younger. And there's serious consequences to that in viewing pornography prior to puberty, right? Your body is not prepared for that, right? You're not sexually developed to be able to understand really even what's going on the screen or even within yourself. So the question is, why do people use pornography? And I think this is pretty obvious, right? Most of us would understand it's to escape pain or seek pleasure. I'm going to look at it in 3 categories: pleasure, attachment, pain, and shame. First, serotonin and dopamine, technically the only two things you enjoy. And it's a silly slide, a little overly journalized, but you get it. Right? Bottom line, people use porn because it feels good. That's it. They use it because it feels good. We know what's going on. What hormones does porn kind of produce or engage with, right? Repeated consumption of porn causes the brain to literally rewire itself. It triggers the brain to pump out chemicals and form new neural pathways, which leads to profound and lasting changes in the brain. So you think about what's going on hormonally in the brain. Neural pathway is best way I understand it is like a trail in the woods. Right? First time you walk it, it's overgrown, stuff everywhere, right? But as you tread it over and over and over, it becomes wider, it becomes more accessible. People that have used porn for a long period of time, that neural pathway is like a 6-lane highway, right? With a Corvette started up, sitting in the middle lane. These hormones, dopamine, serotonin, make you feel good. Oxytocin, right? Some people call that the cuddle hormone, right? It releases fear. You feel safe, you feel loved, you feel wanted, you feel pleasure. So these 3 reasons people use it is to regulate emotions, right? I'm going to use the word false in the sense of not fully what it's meant to be. An analogy I like to use is if I go to a buffet with a lot of food that's got MSG pumped into it, that feels good. I like to eat it, right? It's yummy, tastes good. Problem is, 30 minutes later, I leave and I feel hungry again and I feel bloated, right? That's what I mean by false. It's not fulfilling in the way that it was designed to be, right? So porn is a false coping mechanism. Porn is also a false sense of attachment. You feel connected, but it's not fully as it needs to be. And it's a false sense of safety. It helps you to escape pain. So let's break these down. We're going to look at each of these 3 in turn. So emotional regulation, how does porn become a false coping mechanism? We're going to look at a little video by Dr. Edward Tronick. It's called the still face experiment. And the idea here is that we learn as kids to regulate our emotions based off the interactions of others, right? Hopefully we grow and develop our own means of coping skills, but a lot of us don't. And so pornography engages in that same, in a very similar process. So let's look at this video.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
And so what happens with pornography? It mimics some of that. The person on the screen images me, right? Those mirror neurons are still firing, and so I can feel safe. When oxytocin is released at orgasm, right? Fear center in my brain kind of shuts off. I feel safe. I feel connected. And so what happens with this unhealthy coping, imagine a kid that grows up without that, without the attuned parent, right? They don't feel safe. They don't really feel that they have choices. A stimulus happens, something painful, and they respond, right? They feel pain and they go to porn. It's immediate because porn has been the place to feel safe. That's the place that helps me regulate my emotions. Next, attachment needs, and we saw a little bit of this in that still face experiment, but pornography is a false type of intimacy. So let's look at intimacy in these 5 categories. Mental intimacy is discussing, exploring thoughts, and letting you get to know me, the way my world inside works, the way I think, the way I dream, right? My ideals, my values. Emotional intimacy is I always say I'm taking the Kevlar off, right? I'm exposing my chest. I'm allowing you to hurt me, right? I'm letting you know my wounds, my joys, my sorrows, my fears, my dreams. Physical intimacy is non-sexual touch. Tons of research on this. We don't outgrow this. Without touch, we don't develop properly, right? And it needs to be safe touch. Sexual intimacy is sexually bonding in a safe context. And then finally, spiritual intimacy, which is connecting together with something beyond yourselves. The way I think about this is these are not all stagnant. They're not all separated from each other, but they work together. So you can imagine these gears. What would happen if one doesn't work? The whole thing kind of grinds to a halt. What happens when you dump shame into it? That's like putting gravel in these gears. What happens when some of these are broken from abuse or neglect in childhood? They don't turn properly. What porn does, it seeks to meet a non-sexual need sexually. And so I put all this torque on that sexual gear. Because I need this. I need connection to others. I need intimacy. But what happens is if I put all this torque on sex and these others are stuck or broken, it blows up, right? This is why to remedy any kind of unwanted pornography use or addictive behaviors, you can't just stop being sexual. It's not how it works. You can't just quit that. That's part of who you are, right? What we need is for these to work together. We need to live in congruency and healthy relationship with others. The third reason people use porn, to escape pain. Trauma is kind of the buzzword these days. Pornography offers a false sense of safety, as I mentioned earlier. If you've not looked at the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, you need to. And it basically is this. There's 10 questions dealing with abuse, both physical and emotional and sexual, neglect, physical and emotional, and household dysfunctions, right? Mental illness, incarceration, substance abuse, divorce, these things. And of these 10 pretty generalized things, the more you agree to in the affirmative that these happened to me as a kid, the more likely as an adult you are to suffer from health issues, behavioral issues, including addiction and others. So these things, right? The more ACEs as a kid, the more likely these things, the more vulnerable you are to these things in adulthood. It's physical, it's mental health, it's different behaviors. So the ACE score, right, as a kid, these things I went through have predictive value on me as an adult. With 4 or more ACEs from this report, with 4 or more of those questions answered in the affirmative, you are 27% more likely to engage in intercourse by the age of 15. 40% more likely to experience teen pregnancy, 35% more likely to experience teen paternity. So there's a direct relationship here between the adverse childhood experiences as a kid and the way I cope as an adult, the way it forms my sexual behavior. My dissertation is on the relationship between these ACEs and pornography use in adulthood. I've not been able to find that research yet, and I'm excited, looking forward to figuring out what does that relationship look like. Addicts who report traumatic childhood experiences, those with substance abuse or substance addictions, 54% of them say they had some form of traumatic experience as a kid. Gambling addiction, a process addiction, right? 74% agree in the affirmative. Those with sexual addiction, it's 91% say they experienced traumatic childhood or had traumatic childhood experiences. Exposure to pornography as a kid in particular leads to these three things. Silence, you don't know how to talk about it. Most of the time kids just say, something weird happened, right? Shame, you feel like you did something wrong, therefore something's wrong with you. And secrets, right? I don't know, I can't tell anybody this. Where do we find this toxic trio? Find it with abuse. Exposure to pornography as a kid, particularly without any healthy adult talking to you about sexuality in your development, is itself a form of sexual abuse. Gail Dines, who Zimbardo referenced earlier, says it this way: we need to understand boys as victims of this predatory industry. Boys who are exposed to mainstream online violent pornography are increasingly being traumatized by the cruel images that assault them when they put porn into a Google search. Research shows that an adolescent brain is primed for novelty and risk-taking. And the pornography industry has hijacked this developmental stage by targeting boys as potential consumers. Studies reveal that the more young people are exposed to porn, the harder it is for them to form intimate relationships as they move through adolescence to adulthood. And so you think about it this way. If I walked into a park with kids playing and I pulled out a pornographic magazine, I showed it to one of those kids, and that kid's mom saw it, she would call the police, rightly so. I would be arrested, right? I would be charged with all kinds of major problems, right? What happens if that same kid in the park grabs his mom's cell phone while she's not looking? He hears some other kid say the word porn. He's like, what is that? He types it into Google and he sees what Geldines talked about earlier, right? Whose fault is that? Who does the kid blame, right? He blames himself, right? No one did this to me. I chose to, which is absurd. Right? The kid didn't choose to do that. The kid was curious. It's not their fault. But that shame gets directed inward. It is a predatory industry both on males and females. You've got to treat it as such. Most of the people I've worked with didn't get into all kinds of the deep end of pornography because they wanted to. Right? They were in pain. They needed an escape. They didn't know how to deal with life. And so there's this easy way, and it eventually just kind of Alice down the rabbit hole. So how can we help? I'm going to break this down in 4 easy things. What can you do when someone shares their struggle with you? First, these 4 principles. First, no cliches, no simple answers, no easy fixes. A lot of times people can go, well, have you tried this? Have you done this? Well, read this book, do that thing. Don't do that. Observe, don't overlook. A lot of times we just think we know better, but pay attention. What are they showing you? Right? Observe the shame, observe the pain, be with them. Postpone your judgment. A lot of times in my work in sexual addiction, people will come in and share things with me that are disturbing. I've got to put that judgment away. I've got to put it off, meet them where they're at. And then finally, empathy. Feel with them, not just for them, feel with them, the pain they're in. So remember it this way. The easy fix that you want to offer, here, just do this, just do that. Nope, right? Hopefully this letter, nope, don't do that, right? Remember the old saying, the adage, the verse that fixes everything. Oh, did you hear this? Do this? Nope, don't do that either. It's not helpful. Remember the time you as a person, well, I did blank and it went away, so maybe you should do blank. Nope, don't do that, right? Maybe you feel the need to tell them how wrong it is, whatever they are doing. No, don't do that. If they're telling you, they already know, they already feel that. And so if porn, right, is dehumanization, rehumanizing is doing something new and different. The way I heard it in my own sobriety from my sponsor was abstinence is I'm going to grip my teeth, I'm going to clench my fist, I'm not going to do that anymore. And that has worked for a cumulative 0 people on the face of the planet, right? Abstinence didn't work. Sobriety is I'm not going to do this thing because it hurts me, but I'm going to go do this new and better thing, right? Because it's what I need. And so if pornography is about regulating emotions, feeling connected, and dealing with pain, the solution has to be to those 3 things, right? So it's healthy relationships, help them feel connected, help them with those attachment needs, get them in a group. I'm constantly trying to get my clients into a group. Honestly, I don't even care what group it is, just so long as it's a group of safe, healthy adults. Teach them how to regulate emotions, right? Maybe they don't know. We as counselors have all kinds of tools, right? From cognitive behavioral to dialectical behavioral therapy, all kinds of resources at our disposal. Find something that works for them. And then finally, they got to heal the pain. If they've gone through a lot of those ACEs that I talked about earlier, deeply traumatic experiences as a kid, find a therapist that's trained and equipped to help them walk through that. A couple that I like to refer to as the EMDR, which is what I'm trained in, as well as brain spotting. There's a lot of really good research behind that. Yoga is another excellent way to heal the pain, the pain that the body has stored up. And so if porn is about dehumanization, recovery is about rehumanizing them, rehumanizing the way they see the world. So thanks for being with me today. Again, there's a lot of resources on my website that point you to others that know far more than me. But let's keep doing the good work to help people live free of pornography that is causing them and others harm.